Hello and welcome to episode 108 of my podcast all about knitting and crochet and my yarn shop here in Wiesbaden, Germany. I'm Kiko and today is August 23rd, 2021. And today I'm wearing something new and something old and something that I made myself and something that I didn't. I'll start with the shawl, that's the new thing. This is a very simple shawl that's just knitting garter stitch with some increases in the middle and increases at the beginning and end of the row. And it's knit out of DK weight sock yarn by Opal out of two different color ways. So the first ball of yarn was this color with a mix of blue and gray. And then the second ball of yarn is a bit darker with more gray than blue, but it's basically the same colors, so I thought it goes together well. And my sister knit it for me. I wanted to have a shawl like this in the shop for beginners so they can see what they can knit, what they can make, even if they only know the knit stitch, and some yarn overs. And my sister knit a very simple eyelet row right at the end before casting off. I think I did the cast off, I guess. That's what I usually do when she knits something for me. I will do the cast off and weaving in the ends. So these are two 150 gram balls of yarn. So it's a 300 gram project. And I think it's a nice big triangle. And because there weren't a lot of people in my shop the last 1.5 years, I took it home and I started wearing it, and maybe this winter it could start living in the shop again so people can have a look at it. But even if I wear it, people can have a look at it, so that's okay. Yeah, and the cotton top that I'm wearing is crocheted out of pure cotton. It's a Japanese pattern. It's out of, I think it's one of the first Japanese books I ever bought. And I can't read Japanese or speak Japanese, but because they have charts for everything, for every single stitch, it was fairly simple to do. So the front is crocheted in almost in the round, but with the V neck. And then the back is crocheted straight. And then there's a little bit of a transition from the circle to crocheting straight. And then I just crocheted in the round. To the edge. Yeah, so it wasn't very difficult, but it was a lot of fun to crochet. One of the drawbacks of the Japanese patterns is that they usually only have one size. I think most Japanese people have sort of a similar size. There's not that much of a variation. There used to be not that much of a variation. I think it's different nowadays. But you can change the sizes by using a different yarn. The thicker the yarn or the bigger the needle that you use, the bigger your garment will be. And my height is about average in Japan. I'm a bit broader in the shoulders, but that's something that you can, it's often possible to change. And especially with a garment like this, with these huge armholes, it doesn't really matter what size exactly you have, as long as it's not too small. Yeah, so that's what I'm wearing today. And on to finished objects. I have one finished object today, and that is the little heartstring pullover. A pattern by Jorge Locatelli out of the Heart on My Sleeve ebook. I did not put a heart on the sleeve. To be honest, I forgot about it. I had originally planned to maybe knit one either with purl stitches or with cables, because I didn't want to use a different color because it's already so colorful. Because I used two different 3-ply sock yarns held together to make a DK weight yarn, and because I have so many colors, I also did not add the accent color that's supposed to be in the yoke part of the pullover. Yeah, so I finished it. It's finishing was really quick. It's just a few short rows to lower the front and raise the back, and then it was the ribbing, and then I was done. I had already woven in most of my ends, so there wasn't a lot to do. My sister has finished her little pullover, so at some point we'll sit down together and show both the pullovers that we knit, and then we can either send them off or give them to the little recipients. Yeah, so really happy to have that done, and I'll show it again when we do another sister special. The last one we only did in German, so I don't know if we'll do the other one in English. Maybe you'll have to watch it in German. Don't know. Okay, so that's everything I finished last week. On to works in progress. I worked on quite a few of my projects, not all of them, never all of them, but quite a few of them. So I knit on all the socks I am working on at the moment, and I started a new one, but I'll show you in a minute. The oldest sock I'm working on is the Madeline sock from the Sockmadness. And last time I think I had finished the inside and a few rows of the outside. But then I knitted the round 10 of the chart. You knit the outside together with the cast on edge. So you have to pick up the stitches from the cast on and hold it together, knit it together, plus knit the two color from the two color chart. So that took a bit of time, but it's a really neat way of doing it. So now I have this double hem, and it's a very neat thing, and nothing needs to be sewn in or sewn together afterwards. And I knitted, I think, rounds, so that was round 10, and I think I did round up to round 30. So my plan was to try and knit 10 rounds every week, and because I'd been a bit lazy the weeks before, I kind of made up for it by knitting 20 rounds, and I'm really happy I managed to do that. And I think the leg is 80 rounds, so it's a lot of knitting before you even get to something changing. And then you don't even knit a heel because it's an afterthought heel. All you do is knit in a bit of waste yarn, and then you have, I think you can choose between 40, 50 or 60 rounds for the foot. I'm not quite sure whether that's the right numbers, but I knitted the smallest size. And yeah, but still, there's a lot of knitting to come. I still think it's a beautiful pattern. It's a really warm sock. It's not too tight. It still has a bit of stretch so that the foot can go through. And I will try and keep knitting 10 rounds every week. We'll see how that goes. Okay, the second oldest sock are the socks for my husband that he gets for his birthday. I didn't bring the finished sock. I haven't done a lot on those. And the problem was that I forgot to bring the first sock when we went away for the weekend. And I wasn't quite sure how I had done the transitioning from the rib pattern to the stockinette pattern. So I just knit the ribbing and I stopped because I wasn't quite sure and I didn't want to undo anything, or I didn't want them to be too different. So just finish the ribbing and then I can go on with that this week. And the third pair of socks I am knitting on are the pink socks that I had promised to knit last year. And I had started with the leg part, and I have now put in a contrast color heel and started knitting the foot. I put it on the sock blocker so you can see how much I've knit. I think last week I forgot to show the stitch marker that a friend of mine specially made for my sock projects, because she likes to make big stitch markers, and I said, well, I need a few small ones for sock projects. I don't like too big stitch markers for socks. And then she made this pink one, and I thought, that's perfect. I'm planning a pink sock, so I will have to use that stitch marker for the pink sock. And I knit a fish lips kiss heel. Actually getting a bit too warm with my shawl. And I knit the fish lips kiss heel with the pattern going through the first half of the heel. So I just kept knitting the 1 by 1 rib pattern. I think it's quite funny. I hope the recipient will like it. and then I changed the stockinette for the second half of the heel, and now the bottom of the foot will be stockinette, and then I'll continue with the pattern on the top of the foot. The pattern are the Rome socks by Mina Philipp out of her ebook Around the World in 80, not in 80 days, but Around the World in 8 Socks. It's an ebook subscription that's still running, but as far as I know, you can go and buy it at any time. And it might be a bit cheaper as long as not all the patterns have been published. So you might want to check it out. I really like this pattern. You could knit the whole pattern around the leg. I chose to just put it on the front, but you can do that any way you like. Excuse me. Yeah, so that's the third sock. And sock number 4 is my new cast on, and I started another spiral sock out of pure alpaca yarn. Now, I've said before that the pure alpaca is not meant for socks that you actually walk in, that you use to run around. But these are like bed socks or sofa socks that you can just make sure you have warm feet. So if you use alpaca for your socks, you should you should be really careful not to walk around in them too much, otherwise they will wear through very quickly. And the first pair of alpaca socks that I knit last year were a present for my grandmother-in-law, but I knit them too small. I'd kind of forgotten about her problems with her ankles and her feet, and that they were a bit swollen and they were just too small. So I said to my mother-in-law that she could keep the socks and I will knit a new pair for my grandmother-in-law. And then I knit the first pair of spiral socks because I thought the spiral socks, they will just fit no matter how she puts them on. I used more stitches than I would have needed for her shoe size, and she's really happy with them. I gave them to her, and and the other pair that I knit for her first, that my mother-in-law used, she really liked them. She said they're so soft and so warm, and she knew that the yarn was you could wash it in the washing machine if you use a gentle cycle like a wool wash. But her plan was to wash them by hand because it's just something small and little, and she doesn't mind washing them by hand. And when she went to wash them, she couldn't find them. And the reason was that she accidentally put it in the washing machine with the normal wash. And that's what happened. So you can still see that it was socks, but you can also see, if you look at my hands, that they're so small and they're really, really tight. So it's no way you can put anything into these socks now. They're not, you can't use them as baby socks or anything because they're just too tight. And I thought it was quite interesting to see what happens to the yarn if you put it in the washing machine with the wrong program. Because this yarn, I think it's from that company, from Hansa Farm, it's the first alpaca yarn that you can actually wash in the washing machine. And I've done that, I've tried it. I knitted a hat and I put it in the washing machine on the wool wash program cycle thing, and it worked out perfectly. But if you accidentally put it in the wrong program, this is what happens. But because my mother-in-law said she really liked the socks so much, I said I'll knit another pair for her, and I let her choose whether she wanted normal socks or the same kind of spiral socks that I made for her mother. And she said she liked the spiral socks, but with fewer stitches because they were just too wide for her. So now I started these socks. She picked the color, and now I'm knitting another pair of spiral alpaca socks. And when I finish them and I have a bit of time, I might knit a pair for myself. But first I'll probably knit a pair for my sister. Anyway, that's all the socks I'm working on. Then on to other projects out of sock yarn, even though I have the alpaca yarn in between now. I continued knitting on the Gletscher tunic that I'm knitting into a dress by Jorge Locatelli. And the rounds are getting really long now. And this is the 4th color that I've put into this project. It's comedy. It's out of the comedy series by Opal. And as you can see, I've knit several stripes just with this color, the purple quite clearly shows that this is this ball of yarn, but the blue colors or the turquoise colors in the yarn are quite similar to the rest of the pullover or the rest of the dress. So I think it works out nicely. This was one of my, oh, there's hardly any purple on this side. That's interesting. This is a lot more blue and gray. It's so funny how the colors just go to some places and not to others. I like it. Yeah, anyway, this is one of my car projects when we went away for the weekend. It's fairly mindless knitting. I just have to make sure that I do the increases and decreases. But again, I have beautiful stitch markers. This is the size that my friend likes to make. So they're a bit bigger. And the beginning of round marker is the biggest of all. But it's a perfect color for this project. So I was really happy to put them in here. I only put them in there a few weeks ago. So beginning of the project, I had very simple stitch markers, and then I decided I needed some nicer ones. Yeah, so that's the dress, slowly growing, and I still enjoy the knitting. Then I have oh no, that's not that, the square shrug that I'm knitting. It's another opal yarn. It's it's one of the 100 Wasser colors. So the colors are inspired by this painting by 100 Wasser. And I started the second ball of yarn and I knit about half of it. So that was the car project for the way back. And also during the weekend I knit on it a little bit. Again, I put in a longer cable so I can show what happened. Otherwise, if it's all bunched up on the needle, you can't really tell that I did add anything. So the square is growing. Even though it's the longest cable I have, it's too small to show everything. So this is the whole width that I have at the moment. And I still want to add quite a bit. And again, it's quite interesting how the colors come together some places and not other places. So this is a corner with a lot of blue and white. And then the yellow all comes together at other places. And then there was one spot where it's so much blue and green. It's a lot darker, this bit. So there's one stripe here that's really dark with just blue and green and only white and yellow above and below. Quite interesting. Yeah, I still enjoy that a lot. I almost know the pattern by heart now. I only check every now and then. Yeah, and I'll finish the second ball of yarn at some point, and then when I start the third one, then that's when I start measuring and planning on how big I want it to be, because then when I will fold it and sew 2 little seams, and then I'll knit some ribbing around all the edges that are left. And I want to make sure I have enough yarn from the third ball of yarn to knit all the edges, so that, yeah, I don't want to use more than 300 grams of yarn. That's the square shrug. And then the next sock yarn project is the Town Square Shawl by Romy. And last time I had finished the main square of the shawl, and I had used this neon green to sort of transition from this from the triangle that's knit this way to the rest of the shawl that's going to be knit this way. So this is the beginning of the lace border, and again I finished knitting 100 grams of yarn. So this is the end of the first ball of yarn, and I managed to knit the first chart of the edge, and this is the second, and then there will be number 3 and number 4 or 5, don't remember. Anyway, so one pattern is has these little I don't know, just the little holes in between the I don't know what don't know what to call these, but it's a nice little pattern. It has a bit of reverse stockinette on top and underneath. And now I started another chart which will have some sort of diamonds again, but with this pattern, there was only patterning on the right side row and not on the wrong side row. They were just purled, but with this pattern that I'm knitting at the moment, there's a lace pattern on both the right side and the wrong side row. So that's, I think, what's called a true lace pattern. And in between the lace, there are these nups, these round little thingies. So there's a lot going on with this pattern. I think it's really interesting. What I found interesting with this first chart was that there were 3 rows of reverse stockinette, 3 rows of stockinette, and then again 3 rows of reverse stockinette. And you could have knit them by knitting 2 rows and purling 1 row. But the way she transitioned from one pattern to the other, it meant for each of these stripes you had to purl 2 rows and knit only 1 row. And I thought that was quite a lot of work, but it just proved to me that for Romy, the most important thing is for the design to be beautiful and to be exactly the way she wants it to be. And she would never change anything just to make it easier to knit. So I'm not even sure she finds knitting easier than purling, because her designs never show that. Whereas other designers, like, for example, Martina Behm, she doesn't like to purl. So most of her designs will have lots and lots of knit stitches. Some have only knit stitches. And if she has purling, it's usually only a minimum of purl stitches. And she would never have designed anything like this. I thought that was so interesting how designers are so different in how they approach things and how they design their designs. And I think it's great that we get to knit so many different things. And I really enjoy every designer for what they do. Yeah, so that's a town square shawl, finished 100 grams. So another thing. It has a bit more than 100 grams because of the green stripe. But I think it's quite funny how I have something made out of 100 grams of sock yarn the 3rd week in a row. Probably won't be able to show anything next week. We'll see. Okay, so that's the shawl. I did work a little bit on the gnome. This is another one of Sarah Shearer's Here We Gnome Again gnomes. And I'm using this really bulky yarn. It's an acrylic yarn by Schachenmeier called Bravo Quick and Easy, I think. And I started knitting the body. So I'd finished the hat a while ago. And last week I sat down, I picked up the stitches from inside the hat and started knitting the cable pattern. So it's a bit different from the cable pattern in the hat, and it's a bit offset, so that I think the beard and everything will come between the patterns on the body. And yeah, so it's not a lot, but usually once I've picked up the stitches and I've set up the pattern, it's easier to just pick up and add a few rounds here and there. And then I hope to get this little guy finished, especially as the next mystery gnome is coming along soon. I forgot when exactly it's going to start. I've already bought the pattern, of course, can't not buy it. And yeah, I hope the big one will be done before the mystery gnome starts. If not, I will still start the mystery gnome because I just want to knit along with the clues as they come out. And I'm really excited what kind of little fellow I can add to that bunch over there. So that was the gnome. Then I kept working on my granny square pullover, the huge granny square pullover. So the pattern says crochet 2 gigantic squares and 2 little ones, and then sew it together as a pullover. And last week I had finished the big one, and then last week I crocheted the first sleeve. And I was so sure that the rest of the yarn that I had, I think it was 40 grams, would be plenty to knit to crochet the sleeve. And I had even thought that maybe with the leftover I could start the second sleeve. But I crocheted I think 16 rounds that I had planned, and then I folded it over and I crocheted it together. And I tried it on and it was really rather tight. So I undid the last bit where I had crocheted it together, and then I didn't continue working in the square. So instead of putting another round and then crocheting it together, what I did is I added 2 rows on one side, and then I crocheted it together the way I'd done it before. So this is where the double crochets sort of meet, and I slip stitch in between those groups, and now it fits. And I hope that this bit of yarn will be enough to crochet the edge onto the front and back. So the idea is that the front and back are quite wide, so they should go at least to here. So this is where the sleeve starts, and now it's wide enough, and I want to use this yarn to crochet the square onto the other 2 squares, and it was supposed to finish off the last round. So once I've crocheted the pieces together, I will have the same amount of rows here and here, but not from here to there, because there will be 2 more rows here than in that direction. Sounds a bit complicated maybe, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. Also, what I did with the first square, I told you that I changed the rounds in the middle of the side. So it kind of shows here that I changed from one round to the other. And then with the sleeve, I said I was going to do the same. So I changed. That was another problem with crocheting things together, because I think it must have been this side where I changed from one round to the other, but I also turned the work. So I got here with the red and I turned around and crocheted back, and that's why those colors are on top of each other. And sometimes the yarn changed color, sometimes it didn't, but very often I have the same 2 colors on top of each other because I turned direction. The problem was that being in the middle of the row, I couldn't have crocheted the pieces together. To crochet the sleeve onto the front and back, I needed to be at the beginning of the row, and also to add those 2 rows. So I just slip stitched from the middle to one of the edges. I think it's here. I think this is where I slip stitch from the middle of the edge to the corner, and then I crocheted it together and then undid it, and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to see how the colors maybe come out differently by starting at a different point and crocheting into different directions. Because I've already crocheted it together, it doesn't really show that much. But still, I think it's visible a little bit. And with the next 2 pieces, my plan was to change from one row to the other in the corner. So as you can see, this is where I started the round. No, it's not. This is where I started the round. So you can see this is higher. So when I come round to here, I will slip stitch into the very corner, and then I will start with the corner. So all the color, not all the color changes, but all the round changes are in this corner. And so yeah, once it's done, I can put it next to the other one. I can take a picture and you can see how the colors behave. And also you can see now, because this hasn't been blocked yet, you can see what I talked about last week about the corners being not straight and sort of going in the one direction. And my plan is to now leave this be for the time being and start the sleeve. And I will crochet the sleeve to the same size as this square without crocheting it together, and then take a picture and show how, and also show in the video how the look changes if you have all the stitches from the front or you have one row front and one row back. So that's the plan for next week. I'm going to show off those two squares side by side. Yeah, that's the pullover. And then the other crochet project that I worked on is still my Carnaby crochet along that I've been sort of working on forever now. I added those 2 rows that were missing on the second sleeve. So now both sleeves are the same length, even though the stripes are different. And I crocheted the 1 row that I needed to do on the top of the sleeve to straighten it up, so that now I have a straight line that I can sew onto the front and back. But before I can do that, I have to assemble the front and back, because right now I have lots and lots of little pieces, and I hope that sometime this week I will find the time and concentration to sit down with all the pieces and decide which pieces will be the back and which will be the fronts, and then I have to sew them together. I have to crochet around them. I have to sew them, then sew the fronts and back together, sew the sleeves in, sew the side seams. So there's still a bit to do, and because I want to make it into a cardigan, I will also have to crochet a button band and some buttonholes and something like that. Yeah, so that's the crochet projects. Then on to my knit-alongs. And last week, I've actually worked on both of them. So the first knit-along, the little one, the small one, is about dishcloths. So I knit this dishcloth, and it's the pattern is called Historic Dishcloth, I think. And I think the idea behind it is that these columns reminded the designer of the Greek columns that you can find in really old buildings. I've put the name on my pattern page. You can check it out, and you can find it on Ravelry. It's a free pattern, and I enjoyed knitting it. The interesting thing is that these wrap stitches are a bit like the stitches in the Rome socks, but they're knit from the back, because this is knit in the round like the socks. So you knit those stitches from the back, and the first 2 times I was like, oh, I'm not sure the pattern's coming out right. It looks so weird. And then I turned it round and I'm like, oh, this is what the pattern's supposed to look like. So I realized this is the front. It's not difficult to do. And yeah, really happy I have another dishcloth. I will try to knit another one this week, and I will probably go on knitting dishcloths for some time, because I still haven't got enough for both my kitchen at home and the kitchen here in my shop. But I will bring the knit along to a close, and I will start a new knit along. And a friend of mine suggested that we knit the shawlette Geckolino. It's a German pattern, but I think there is a German and an English version. I have decided that we will start the knit along in September, so we can cast on the 1st of September, and then the first podcast in September I will talk about it in more detail. The pattern calls for 100 grams of fingering weight yarn, but if you have more yarn, you can make it a bigger shawl. And I've planned to use hand-dyed yarn by Wolldackel, the German hand dyer, but I'm sure you can find lots of other beautiful yarns wherever you are. And and I forgot to bring the yarn. It's at home, so I can show that off next week. Yeah, and the last knit along is the Optic blanket. And last week I hadn't finished my square, I think. I have finished that now, and I've added the last square in this piece of the blanket. So now I have another 9 squares knit together, and I have a bit of a rainbow around the white in the middle. to me it feels a bit like this is the prism, this is the piece of glass, and then you get all the rainbow colors once the light shines through. And I'm really, really happy with it, even though it looks a lot different to all the other pieces that I've knit so far. And I have friends who've told me I should make a whole blanket like this and not combine it with these pieces. But I like to mix things up. So, and every time I finish one of these pieces, I show off what I've done so far. This was the blue one with all the blue colors. And I think this was the first one that I knit. So now I have 4 of these squares. This week I will start the next one. I'm planning on doing 2 more, and then I will sew them together and I'll have a nice big warm blanket that will probably live in our car, is what I decided, because we don't have a blanket in the car and I tend to get cold everywhere, and I would like to have something nice and snuggly whenever we go places. Yeah, that was everything I knit and crocheted last week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!